I don't know.
Say it with me. I don't know.
Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. And so we observe the world, we see what happened, and then we define the thing that happened as the reason the thing happened. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. Maybe even ask them about that thing that they've created, because to them, it's immensely valuable. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We have no other choice. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
Never know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
I've found that we actually have a lot more comfort in ourselves than we realize. Instead of, thinking, oh, we always need God, we always need something to fall back on, and realize, wow, we got through that and we didn't need God. We can do this. We're actually stronger than we think we are, and we depend on each other, and the family gets closer together, and we rely on each other, and builds trust and love.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 136 of the Everyone's Agnostic podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, Dr. Bob and I interview Wendy Marsman. Wendy was raised as a Fundamental-Evangelical, and she served in cross-cultural missions for 15 years with Wycliffe Bible Translators. Her story entails her journey out of the brainwashing that suppressed her as a woman. Wendy left organized religion in 2008, became agnostic, and separated from her missionary husband in 2009, ending a 20-year marriage. She reconnected with a high school sweetheart and started a new blended family. Today, at age 47, she, her husband, and children are all atheists and figuring out how to live honest lives within reality. Wendy credits hundreds of hours of atheist podcasts like this one for giving her the courage to step out of the Christian institutions where she felt brainwashed. We talk about Christian patriarchy and the suppression of women, and how the trauma of finding agency as a woman after leaving one's faith is often an additional trauma to overcoming the loss of God. If you're a woman and after listening to Wendy's story you would like to contact her, you can email her at marsman.wendy@gmail.com. That's Marsman, M-A-R-S-M-A-N, .Wendy, W-E-N-D-Y, @gmail.com. Wendy's story brings up an issue that many ex-Christians run into, and that's navigating the philosophical changes brought on by a deconversion and how we, as married couples, handle this metamorphosis. This is a big deal and often ends up being the final straw in many marriages that may have already been weakening. I was fortunate that my wife worked through my changes with her own honesty and personal reflection and found that she could find a path of her own for herself that was compatible with mine, and in our case, even better than when we were both Christians. She did, however, discover that her resentment of how she was treated under the Christian patriarchal system grew more intense the further away she got. This is always going to be unique to each marriage and the pre-existing dynamics at play there. No two humans are alike, and we all bring our own personal histories and pathologies to our relationships. It's like a chef experimenting with different herbs, spices, vegetables, and meats, and discovering that some recipes produce a delicious entree, while others become a disaster he or she would never serve to the patrons. When we try to blend ourselves in intimacy with another, especially in that we are ever-evolving creatures, we can see that in many ways the odds are against us, becoming something beautiful and pleasant and compatible. And we're lucky if it ends up working at all. But even then, you both are still evolving and thus are moving targets. This can be exciting, as in the relationship is ever renewing itself. or it can destroy the relationship because the personal paths grow further and further apart. I point this out to remove some of the guilt that comes with thinking we are a failure when our marriages collapse. Often it is not an indictment on either party, but simply a matter of incompatible spices. We should recognize that it requires a lot of maturity and flexibility on everyone's part to create a relationship that is mutually beneficial, and that every degree of rigidity and fragility and blame that presents itself lowers the chances of the marriage surviving this metamorphosis that deconversion can introduce into the mix. We taped this conversation on January 8th, 2017. We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast or leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Our show is available on most podcast platforms. Also, you can support us monetarily in two easy ways. You can pledge a $1 per episode through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA Podcast. Or leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. And the segue music on this episode is provided by the daughter of our guest. She's 17 years old. It's called A Terrific Distance by Ribcage. Thanks for listening, and be a yes sayer to what is.
Wendy!
Yes.
Hello. Hello to Canada. You're in Canada.
Yes.
From Tennessee.
Yeah, and hello there to Tennessee.
Yeah.
Is it winter there?
You better
Very
know
much.
it. Today it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about
It's
9
degrees outside.
Yeah.
Oh, well, ours is minus 10.
Oh. Well, it's
wow.
going to be, the difference is we have southerly breezes, and so we're going to get 70 degrees by Thursday.
Oh, I envy you.
Oh, boy. What a weird
crazy?
place to live, though. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's good to have you.
Yeah, thank you. It's very exciting to be on this podcast. It's the first podcast I've ever been interviewed on. So, but I'm an avid listener to multiple podcasts, so it's long overdue, I'd say.
Yeah.
Well,
But,
and we pride ourselves in interviewing people that are nobodies, you know? Like most of the time,
Yeah.
people just interview people with books or with
Yeah.
some kind of name or recognition
Yeah.
or scholarship.
We're not beneath that. We do
we
we do
we're not
that
beneath it,
sometimes.
but honestly, I really have gotten to where, I mean, I was tempted to go that direction, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
But everybody else is already doing that.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And we're
These are
interviewing
real
people
people.
like Wendy who has a story. Everybody's got a story.
yeah, and a
And
good
everybody's
story, too.
story is interesting.
Yeah.
So you were mentioning all those podcasts that you've been listening to, and I was looking at the thing that you sent me, and I can't find that part. What are some of the shows you listen to?
Well, when I first got into podcasting, it was around 2008, 2009, and I had a little iPod Shuffle that I took on my walks with me. I started out listening to the Free Believers Network, which was a podcast by Darren Hufford, and he also has a co-host that's a lady. And it was quite intriguing because he's really into the home church movement and taking people out of the four walls of the traditional church and trying to experience Christianity outside of that. So that was the first podcast I started listening to. And then actually yours was the next podcast that I started listening to. And I think you guys actually started it in 2014, which was when I was listening. So it was probably one of the first episodes you guys had.
Right.
But the podcasts that you listened to were really a part of your deconstruction, wasn't it? I mean, those really helped you.
Oh, they're invaluable for me, mainly because I became estranged from 95% of my friends and family. So the community that I had grown up with and been a part of for 40 years basically vanished. And I had very few friends that were outside of the church. So I felt very alone. And if it wasn't for, people like Seth Andrews and David Smalley and even later on Ryan Bell, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I felt like they helped me reprogram my brain after being brainwashed is how I feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think I've probably listened to about 500 hours of podcasts in the last 2 years.
My
Wow.
gosh.
Well, let's go back to the beginning, Wendy. I mean, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I just turned 47 last week.
Okay.
Wow.
And let's go back to your religious upbringing. Talk about that context.
So actually, before I say very much more, I wanted to refer to Silken Laumann, who is a Olympian rower, and she wrote a book called Unsinkable. And at the beginning, when the book came out, her family was quite upset with her because of some of the things that she'd said in the book that they felt was damning, and I don't know if they were going to actually sue her. Just difficult, dysfunctional family background. And I sort of paraphrased part of what she had said in, I think, the foreword of her book. She said, "It's incredibly painful to have your traumatic experience denied by the family that supposedly loves you, and it seems it's very difficult for a family to accept their role in the dysfunction. I recognize that my family and friends' memories of the events I describe are different than my memories, and what I have to say is not intended to hurt anyone, and I regret any unintentional harm resulting from the telling of my story." So I had copied that down about a year and a half ago when I was starting to think about writing my own memoir, and I thought, well, I probably better say that right now.
No, that's beautiful.
Sure. No, we get it.
Oh my gosh, no, seriously, that is a great way to start, because you're going to be honest.
Yep.
And you're going to say what you experienced, and you're acknowledging that it's probably a different version of what happened than in what's going on in everybody else's memory. That's just true.
Yeah.
That's just human. Our memories are rarely ever accurate, but they are what they are, and that's where you're going to come from. And this is somewhat of a disclaimer to some extent, but also to say, look, I'm going to be honest, and I don't want to hurt anybody, but I'm also not going to censor my experience in fear of hurting you.
Yeah.
Yes, and when I first came out as an atheist, like I was a nobody. I mean, I didn't even know what an agnostic was for about 4 or 5 years. I was so scared of getting swept back into the church, and I didn't know what atheism was. But when I actually came out after starting to listen to the podcast and realized that I wasn't the only one, and that I had a voice, I didn't do it the right way. I came out very strong. I had a lot of anger, and I did alienate some people, including my relatives and some family members that I regret being so forceful about. So there was a time where I sort of wanted to shrink back and say, oh, how can I go back and undo that? Do I become anonymous? And I went through my Facebook feeds. I deleted everything related to atheism, and I just tried to be neutral for a while. And then, I realized, no, I am who I am. And that's why I thought this caveat at the beginning would be helpful.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Everything's filtered through you, of course. That's the way.
That's right.
That's how we do it. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
All right, so lay it on us. Having said that.
Yeah. So, I have quite an interesting background. I was raised on a homestead on 180 acres up on the mountain in the interior of the province of British Columbia, which is the most western province in Canada. And I had a very dysfunctional home. My mother was Fundamentalist-Evangelical, who was influenced by Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses and lots of very fundamentalist groups. And my dad, he tried to become religious. My mom tried to convert him, and he said, or what he had told me later was he went away for a weekend and, basically said, nature is my God. I don't believe in a God, and I'm an atheist. So having the dynamic of a mother who's very religious and a father who was an atheist was interesting, and I don't think I've fully understood how that affected the dysfunction in the family.
Are they still together?
No, they aren't. They divorced after 47 years of marriage.
Wow.
But they stayed together while you were a kid, even though they had
they
religious
just divorced
difference. Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So, but my dad, being an atheist, he still saw the value of having religion in his life. So even though he was a secular type person, and he taught at a public high school. He wanted his 2 kids, my older brother and myself, to go to a Christian school. And there wasn't a Christian school in the little town that was near our house. So him and my mom helped start a church school in the basement. It was a 1-room church school. So that's where I went for the first 7 years of my life. It was an ACE school, Accelerated Christian Education. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I haven't.
Very, very strict.
Uniforms?
Uniforms. It's all correspondence, so the teachers actually don't have to be accredited teachers or, have a degree themselves.
Bob's shaking his head.
It's an inferior education. Pretty much everybody who goes to the school has to, make up classes because it's just not proper. It's just not a very good school.
Are there science classes or anything like that? Do they teach you science?
Well, it's like I say, it's sort of correspondence, and you work at your own pace, and you set your own goals, and you score your own work. So it's very, there's not interaction. You get in trouble if you talk to anybody in class. You get in trouble for doing basically anything other than working. And because my mom was the supervisor at the school, there was interesting dynamics where, she was the mom at school, but she wasn't the mom. She was the teacher, and then she comes home and, she's still the teacher. So they were very strict. My parents definitely believed in spanking, and they believed in the woman's and men's role. So they bought into the Bill Gothard idea.
Oh, wow.
Where there's the father's the head, and he's an umbrella. I still remember we actually drove 8 hours to go to a Bill Gothard seminar once. My dad was totally all for that. So that was difficult to grow up in, because when that's all you know, it's hard to come out of that. It still is hard for me.
I'm trying to come out of it as we speak. I'm serious. That is the water you're swimming in. It's the neural pathways your brain is now burned into you. And breaking out of those constructs and those molds, man, hard work.
And then the other part of that, growing up in the small town area, was that there was very few church opportunities. So the only main evangelical church, it was called a Missionary Church. At that point in time, it had its own denomination. Now I think it's joined with the Evangelical Missionary Church. But what it meant was that every Sunday night there would be a new speaker, and they were some missionary from around the world. And so I was exposed at a very young age to hearing about missionaries. And my mom would say, well, if my husband ever becomes a Christian, we're going to the mission field right away. So I sort of grew up being groomed to be a missionary. So then when we moved, when I was 14, we moved to the West Coast on Vancouver Island, and I started going to a normal school. It was still a Christian school, but a normal school, with 30 students in a classroom and a teacher. And I got involved in 4 or 5 different churches in the area, a Nazarene church, a Brethren church, a Baptist church, and a Mennonite Brethren church. And the youth groups would all combine and have big events. And we went on 3 short-term mission trips. I went when I was 15, 16, and 18. And 2 of those were overseas, one to the West Indies and one to Bogota, Colombia. And so that sort of just kept the ball rolling in terms of where my life was headed in terms of going to the mission field. And, my mom was the biggest influence in my life, continuing to push me towards that. And being in the church, it's already a minority group. Ironically, being white, you don't feel like you're a minority, but being a Christian, you feel like a minority. And then being a missionary is a minority within that church world.
Subculture, yeah.
Yeah, it's a subculture. So I kept going in that direction and went to vocational cooking school, and then went to Bible school. And at Bible school, I met a missionary kid who had grown up in Papua New Guinea. Interestingly enough, I listened to your interview with Paul Young, the author of The Shack.
Yeah.
And he described the third culture kid scenario where someone who grows up in a culture that is not their own culture on the mission field, it's not their parents' culture, which was the home country, so they become a third culture. And the husband I married was very much influenced by that himself, and he has a lot in common with Paul Young. He also went to 13 different schools. He also grew up in villages in Papua New Guinea. He also was a PK when his father became a pastor, and he also had an affair with his wife's best friend. So that was interesting listening to that interview.
Yeah. So you married him in what, 90 or?
Yeah, 1990.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now one thing that I just kind of want to insert here is that when you and I were talking and getting to know each other, and you were looking at my profile picture, and I have 2 blondes and 2 brunette children, and you saw my family, and you said, "Are you a mixed family?" I said, "No, my wife and I are actually high school sweethearts, and we're going on 30 plus years of being together." And you said, "I wish that I had married my high school sweetheart," because I think I just kind of want to insert here that you married this missionary kid, and you guys stayed married for what, 20 years?
Yeah, I was 3 months shy of 20 years.
Yeah. And then we can talk about, whatever you want to talk about as far as the demise of that marriage, but then you actually went back, or somehow you rehooked up, and this is like a movie. I just think this is something out of a movie, somehow you meet up again with this old high school flame, and that's who you're married to now.
Yes, it's pretty amazing how the universe had that in the works, I guess, or luck. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't thank God for it now.
No.
Yeah.
But so I had dated my current husband. I dated him when I was 17. He had also gone to the Christian school. It was a Christian Reformed church, and he was from that background. And we dated for the summer, and then he felt he wanted to go off to Calvin College in Michigan. So he went off, and I never saw him for 21 years because he was 2 years older than me. So 22 years until the high school reunion. And our high school, because the school wasn't very large, there were 4 classes that all had their reunion the same summer. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up seeing him for about 10 minutes in 2008. And at that point, his marriage of 18 years was ended. And I was still a pious Christian thinking, well, my marriage isn't very good, but at least I'm not divorced and sinning.
Yeah.
I didn't say that to him out loud, but I was thinking that.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. Staying married is a big deal to Christians, yeah.
Yes, very much so. And so anyways, 2 years later, we ended up living together, and we've been married. We've been together for 6 years now, married for 3. So
happy?
Oh my goodness, it's night and day.
And
I haven't been happier.
Having met him at a Christian school, is he a Christian today?
Well, that's been interesting too. He knew that I had left the church, and how we reconnected as we met up at the high school reunion. But I was so strict in my morals, or what I thought they were morals was, so on Facebook, I had friends with guys. I was friends with guys, but I would never comment. I would never message them. It was like off limits because as a married Christian woman, you could only talk to other women. You couldn't talk to other men or married men.
Yeah. No, that happened this week with me.
Really?
There's an old friend of ours back in Oklahoma, and Mindy's been telling me that her posts are really fun and really interesting. But she's a Christian. Mm-hmm. But I thought I'm gonna friend her because we went to the same church back there, and I thought I want to catch all these interesting posts. She writes poetry and different things.
Sure.
So I send her a friend request, and yesterday she private messages Mindy and says, "Hey, tell Cass that my husband and I have a policy that we don't friend opposite sex on Facebook, and so just tell him that I'm not going to accept his friend request."
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
It was weird.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So you have to be less of a human to you have to just stuff your humanity in a bag or something.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And not deal with, but okay. All right.
And you have to not be friends with somebody because their genitalia is different or something,
Yeah.
It's
weird.
So, but part of the,
Very weird.
Wendy, you've already referred to your experience as a brainwashing, and this is kind of what, now that you and I are both out, and we look back, we're like, and we're talking about, like in this case, this policy of not friending somebody. And we look back now and go, wow, that's just so strange. And Bob is sitting here,
what?
Obviously thinking this is strange. But it's the water we were swimming in.
Yeah.
Very much so. And so the main men in my life were my dad and my husband and my father-in-law. And I really didn't know very many other men at all for those 39 years, which is incredibly dysfunctional in itself and isolating and narrow-minded, and that podcast I'd mentioned that I was listening to, the Free Believers Network.
Mm-hmm.
I started listening to that in 2008, and the co-host is a woman, and on one of their podcasts they talk about that, how in the church they didn't feel like they would have ever been allowed to be co-hosts, where a man and a woman who weren't married could be sitting in the same room and discussing things, and that started the ball rolling in my own mind. And so it was after listening to that podcast that I friended Ian, my husband, and started thinking, and then I friended a few other guys from the high school reunion and realized, these people are interesting. They're, this is a whole another group of the world that I just didn't know about.
Didn't get struck by lightning.
No, and I didn't get struck by lightning.
Yeah, Wendy, but certainly during the course of a life, you interact with, like if somebody says hello, can't you say hello to the guy that just said hello to you or something? Or is that?
Oh, definitely.
That's
and
fine,
of course,
right?
If you have them over for a dinner, you can interact with them, but you never felt like you could actually sit down for like half an hour and really get deep with anyone from the opposite sex. So I had lots of interaction with women and being in women's Bible studies and going on walks with women, going to coffee with women, but none of that with men. So it's been new to me. It's still new to me, actually, to be alone with someone who's not my husband.
It's almost like, did you wear a burqa? I mean, it's as bad as that, really. I mean, we have some folks, in my apartment complex that are Muslim, and all I get is hi, if I get that, when I say hello, but... Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I didn't realize I didn't even know the word fundamental. Like growing up, it's, we're evangelical and we're Christian, and this is our brand of Christianity and everybody else is wrong. So I didn't realize how narrow my world was. My mom only wore skirts. I only wore skirts till I was 14, and my mom never wore a bathing suit. We didn't really agree with women with short hair. So it was more closer to Amish in some way.
Yeah. It sounds like that. Yes.
Yeah.
I interjected that on purpose because I think that's a fascinating part of the story.
Sure.
So you were starting to unpack like Ian's faith or Ian's religious journey, because you met him at high school and it was a Christian school, and then when you met him at the reunion, you were still a Christian and still married, and so I guess at what point did you both reconnect? Well, I guess you said on Facebook, and then he kind of probably witnessed your deconstruction right before his eyes, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, actually, because when I, friended him, realizing I could talk to men, who weren't my husband, I was still very much a Christian at that point, trying to be a Christian outside of church, and had a few other people who were interested in starting a home church. But I started emailing him, and he's very intellectual, and he'd write long emails, and we would discuss what it was like, in his background, because I really didn't realize that my background was so narrow, and also that the Christian Reformed isn't as evangelical. They don't know what the sinner's prayer is, and I thought everybody knows what the sinner's prayer is. So we would have long email conversations, and at that point I was still married for a full another year, and another half year, and then I lived in the same house, but I wasn't actually officially married at that point. We were separated. So I didn't feel I was doing anything wrong, because I wasn't, I didn't think I was ever going to marry again. I at that point I hated men in general, because they were all chauvinists and misogynists, and I only knew one type of men. But I was having these very intellectual religious conversations by email with Ian.
And at that point, he was still a Christian or not?
Yes, he was very much still a Christian.
Okay.
And so he knew that I was leaving religion, but, it wasn't until about a year later before I really said, I'm definitely not a Christian at all. And like I say, his religion was much more neutral and not fundamental at all. So he was fine with me not going to church when I first moved in with him. And I don't know, it was okay for him. His family didn't accept me very much, but he was fine with it. And I did not plan on deconverting him or influencing him in any way. But he started, being interested in some of the podcasts I was listening to. So he started listening to them because he loves podcasts. So, you can't listen to Seth Andrews and David Smalley and Matt Dillahunty very much before you start to question stuff.
You're right.
Yeah.
And so he's come out about a year and a half ago. He came out to his family as an agnostic, and then this last summer he's said now he's an atheist. So that I did not expect at all. So
Wow. How about
it's
that?
and all of our kids, I have 3 and he has 2. They've all left the church too and are much happier outside of religion.
Yeah. Oh,
so
of course. Is your ex-husband still a Christian?
yes, interestingly, when I left the church, I actually officially went to the pastor because we were missionaries, and that church had sort of taken us under their wing when we came back from the mission field, and we had lived in the parsonage next door. I felt responsible if we didn't go to that church, and so I was not liking what was happening there, and I felt, well, maybe we just need to go to an interdenominational church, because I didn't grow up completely Baptist, so maybe that's the problem. So we did try to go to some other churches. So at that point, my husband did also stop going to that church, and he stopped going to church for about 6 months. But then when the marriage fell apart, he went back to church. And
Doubled down. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Well, all of his family are, very much into missions, or his brother's a pastor. So you sort of have to turn your back on all that if you say I don't believe it. And he's pretty close to his family.
I have a question for you, just as an aside. You mentioned the sinner's prayer, and everybody knows that. Well, of course, there's me, and I don't know what is that. What do you mean by that?
Well,
the sinner's prayer?
when I growing up in the church I was in, or we were in, it was very, very clear from a young age. I was 7 when I prayed the prayer, and it was, the Sunday school teacher says, "Do you want to go to heaven or hell when you die?" And, this is what heaven's like, this is what hell's like. And of course, I don't want to go to hell. So, you go off into a corner and you pray with somebody, and, you say, I invite Jesus into my heart. I admit that I'm a sinner, and, please forgive me, and I'll give my life to Jesus.
And that's essentially it? That's the prayer?
That's essentially it, in that you're admitting that you're a sinner. So the sinner's prayer, that's, I guess where the root of it comes from.
And you're 7 years old, huh?
Yeah, you're 7. So,
I can imagine how much
so
sin
much.
So here's an example, Bob. Dear
Okay.
God, I want to be a part of your family. You said in your word that if I acknowledge that you raised Jesus from the dead and that I accept him as my Lord and Savior, I would be saved. So God, I now say that I believe you raised Jesus from the dead, that he's alive and well. I accept him now as my personal Lord and Savior. I accept my salvation from sin right now. I am now saved. Jesus is my Lord. Jesus is my Savior. Thank you, Father, for forgiving me, saving me, and giving me eternal life. Amen. And that's it. You went from lost to found.
Just like
right
that.
there. If it was real, some would
You
say
have to be sincere.
You have to be sincere, but if God himself determined that you were sincere, you just went from hellbound to heavenbound in that instant.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's when we were growing up, I felt like the Catholics weren't Christians. That's what I was told, because they didn't say the sinner's prayer. And the Jehovah's Witnesses weren't Christians, and the Mormons weren't Christians. They were all cults, because they didn't believe in Jesus being, the savior of the world. So it was very black and white, that prayer. And like I said, growing up in that, you don't realize that nobody else, that they can still call themselves Christian even if they haven't said that.
Very tribal. Very.
Sure.
Everything.
Us and them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, and
we're
when
right, you're wrong.
And when you engaged with Ian, and he was kind of this reformed, or at least progressive, he wasn't familiar with even caring about saving the lost. Here you were. No, wait, was he a missionary kid?
No. He'd grown up in a normal home with two Christian parents.
Yeah, so you're the opposite. You're actually giving your life, and then I think it's worth noting that you gave 15 years of your or more of your life to being a Bible translator, and you lived in Brazil for 8.5 years. You raised some of your kids there, and so your whole life mission, the purpose of Wendy's life, is to save the lost, get people to say this prayer, get people to go from heaven to hell.
Yeah.
And make this transition, and then only to find out it was much ado about nothing. Now that is fucking daunting.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and I'm still trying to unpack that. I have many days where I'm ready to commit suicide because I don't have a reason to live anymore. My whole reason was the missions. And I will go back and say I actually wasn't a Bible translator. We were with the Bible translator mission, but we were support workers. So my husband was maintenance, and I was involved in the mission school. But we were the second front line. The front line were the people who went out into the village and translated the Bible, and we were on the mission base helping them with whatever they needed, so.
Yeah, but still, that was your purpose.
The whole goal was, and I was very, we would come back on furlough and speak in churches and mission conferences. Yeah. And the whole thing was, I believed it 110% that if you didn't have the Bible, you couldn't really be a Christian. And that's because, you'll just make up your own religion, and the Bible was, the literal Bible was, the most important thing, the only truth. So going from the short-term mission trips to marrying an MK, and also went to a Bible school that was very focused on missions, and then going to the mission field at the age of 24. When I went to the mission field, my 2 girls were born down there in Brazil, and then coming back and also having all my, my in-laws, my husband's parents, had been missionaries their whole life. They were representatives for the mission in Canada. Their whole reputation was at stake if anything happened. And you're very much in the limelight. And to change any of that doesn't just affect you, it affects everybody's opinion of themselves and also their opinion of what a missionary is. So I sort of didn't want to pop other people's bubbles. Because it's its own little subculture, and it is really, really hard. I have 3 friends who aren't missionaries anymore who I had known down in Brazil, and 2 are agnostic and 1 is atheist. But other than that, I don't know anybody who's not a missionary who started out as missionary, because it's hard to leave Christianity, but leaving a missionary, being an ex-missionary, is just one more level.
Oh, for sure.
You're just so deep into it.
Well, I think it's easy for us to say that to the degree in which you were invested in Christianity is the degree in which you're going to feel and hurt, the pain of leaving it. I mean, that's kind of common sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, very well put.
So as a missionary, I mean, you're considered that's the A team, that's the NBA of Christianity, or whatever, that's the most serious application of one's faith, is to literally lay down your life. You've decided, I don't have a career, I don't even have an identity outside of furthering this message.
Well, even Wendy said the front lines, using a war metaphor, using we are the onward Christian soldiers, you know what I mean, that type of stuff.
Absolutely.
So, wow. Gosh.
Yeah, and when I first met my husband, the first date I went on with him, I was, 19 years old, and he said, we were in Bible school, and he said, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I said, on the mission field, married with kids. And sure enough, after 5 years, I was on the mission field with 2 kids. But, that our whole marriage was completely based on the fact that we were going to go to the mission field, because that's all he'd known. He grew up in Papua New Guinea. He'd seen his parents as missionaries. That was his comfort zone. So marrying him, I knew I was in for a career missionary, which means that's all you do. So when we left Brazil in 2005 and came back, it was really shocking. Well, 2005 to 2007, he tried to be a representative for the mission. It didn't work out very well. So when we actually left the mission, their marriage was pretty much over, because what else are we going to do? Our whole life was based on that. Our marriage was based on that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
and because you have kids together, you still have to engage with him on a regular basis. How's that going?
Well, this is where I put that caveat at the beginning. It's not gone very well at all. I begged him to go to counseling to get help for his mental issues. Being a third culture kid, I think he's got a lot of PTSD from being uprooted so many times and going to so many different schools. And he definitely has signs of probably PTSD and other issues that he needs probably some help with. So it's been very difficult, and the kids don't have much contact with him. So it's a sore spot.
Sure.
I wish the best for him, and I wish that ironically, he has an amazing voice.
Like a singing voice?
Singing voice.
Yeah.
So he has a really, really good voice, and he sounds like a country and western singer. And I wish he could realize that, he could go sing karaoke at the bars, and if he wasn't a Christian, he'd have an awesome life.
Yeah.
So he's restricted because of that. But honestly, that's what he really needs to do, is pursue his music career, because it's totally natural. He never took one singing. I took 3 or 4 years of voice lessons, and I have half the voice that he does, and he never took a singing voice lesson in his life. So Wendy, that kind of thing.
Yeah, were you inspired by the story that, I guess it's the book, Through Gates of Splendor?
Yes, I did read that, and a lot of the area is similar in terms of Ecuador. The location. It's tropical and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the lady, Elizabeth Elliot, one of her books called Passion and Purity was very influential to me in high school. Mm-hmm. Sort of the purity culture, but back then we didn't call it that. But it was the same kind of thing where you saved yourself or your husband. So that's very much along the lines of the early missionaries. We were sort of the next generation. Yeah,
but these were the heroes of people like yourself.
Yeah, they were the heroes because they had gone in initially to tribes that had never seen another, white person.
Yeah. So what this is, Bob, is that Jim Elliot was killed he was murdered by the people that he was trying to save. Oh. And then she goes back there, right? Is that the story, Wendy?
There were 5 men who were killed, so the 5 widows all, decided what they were going to do with their life. I'm not sure if she was the one who went back or one of the other widows went back into the village.
But it's one of the greatest examples of people doubling down on their faith after being betrayed by their faith.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm curious, but I would love to hear the feminine perspective if, in fact, you were oppressed as a woman. And if maybe even you felt bullied, or maybe you felt like your thoughts and feelings weren't valid. Does any of that ring true?
Oh, yes. Very, very true.
Can you talk about that?
Everyone's background's different. I did not have happy parents. I was molested by my dad at a very young age, and my mother witnessed it. But she didn't do anything about it, and I didn't find out about it till I was in my 20s. But
what do you mean you didn't find out about it? How could you be molested and not know about it?
Because I was under 2 years old.
Oh, I see.
So, but I knew something was up in how my mom interacted with me and my dad, and she said she wouldn't let us be alone together. And so I grew up with this distance created between my mom and my dad. I mean, my dad and myself. And yet there was this other issue where I had to submit to him because he was the father and he was the one who would spank me.
And all that Bill Gothard shit, yeah.
And all the Bill Gothard stuff. So the guilt that I felt that I didn't have a good relationship with my dad, even though he creeped me out from day one. I never liked him. There was something was off all the time. And of course, I blamed myself that I wasn't a good daughter.
Yeah.
After hearing from Bill Gothard, and also Focus on the Family was very influential to my mom. So,
yeah.
Something's wrong with me, and why can't I get along with my dad? And having him being the only, because we lived in a remote area those first 14 years, him being really the only man, in my life was, not a good example for sure. So I'm still finding ways where I have very, very inbred reactions to adult men who are older than me. And I went through about a 5-year time frame where I would get panic attacks talking to any man who was an authority figure in my life. So it goes way back. So,
well, let me just stop there and say you're talking to 2 men that are older than you. We're not an authoritative figure in your life, but I want to congratulate you for coming on. I'm just realizing every guest we have on is nervous, but I'm thinking that your courage to be on here right now is worth noting, and you should be proud of yourself.
Absolutely.
Well, that's interesting because I honestly expected I would get a panic attack talking to you guys, because the last time I had, I have a home-based computer business, and the last time I had a conference
Skype call, yeah.
a conference, well, we do WebEx, so it's video
Same.
with my former boss, then I started shaking, but then I think like I say, I've been listening to you guys on your podcasts recently, so you sound more like, you feel like you're my friends already, so it didn't feel so intimidating.
Well, I'm glad that you found us safe. I mean, that's
definitely.
That's an honor.
Oh yeah, definitely. So
Thank you.
I'm not shaking right now. I'm fine.
Oh, it's so cool.
Absolutely.
but I'm still wanting to hear, if you can, talk about, like, when and if did you get your power back, or did you get your agency? Did you start to validate your own feelings, and maybe even figure out who is Wendy and what does she want? And it's okay to be Wendy, and it's okay to have wants. It's not selfish or evil. How did you work? Are you still in that journey, or where are you on that?
Oh, definitely. I'm still in that journey. I guess it started out when my husband had an emotional affair with my best friend when we were on the mission field. And it went on for a year and a half. And I didn't have a voice at that point, because if I had spoken up, both our family and the other family would have, been disciplined, is what they call it. And you leave the mission field and you're damned by the church.
Oh, geez.
So I couldn't say anything.
You watched it happen. You couldn't say anything.
No,
and
I couldn't say anything. And so that was the beginning of realizing that things can happen to me that are out of my control if I stay in this religious upbringing and in this religious situation. And then when it happened again, it wasn't my best friend, but it was another adult MK that my husband
missionary kid
was unfaithful with. I realized, okay, this is a trend, and I can't be quiet this time. But my mother-in-law found out, and she said, no, you can't tell anybody. So for 2 more years, I kept quiet about that.
Oh, geez.
And then I had a falling out with my dad, and have been estranged from him since. It's been 7 years. And I saw my parents' marriage being held up by my mom, and realizing, in 20 years, that's what I'm going to be like if I don't do something different. And so summer of 2009 was a really big turning point for me, visiting my parents and saying, I don't want this anymore. I don't want to become, because my mom had been my sole mentor for those 40 years, because I would talk to her all the time, and she would, say, well, even if your husband is, because my dad had never become a Christian, even if he's not a Christian, at least he's not an alcoholic, and just keep praying for him. And, if we change, then he'll change, and all this kind of crap. And I believed it. And I sort of blame her for me having the marriage go on too long, my own marriage. But, that's the way that she's been living her life. So finally I thought, I can't do this anymore. And I came home from that visit and told my husband, the marriage is over. I hate men. I'll never be with another man. Because I'd only seen 3 men in my life, really. And all of them were the same type of men. And I said, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Wendy, you said your ex-husband had an emotional affair. Does that mean like sexual as well?
No, that's the opposite of
it's physical, but not actually intercourse. So it's everything but. In the church, you can get away with that, and so many times emotional affairs happen, and they aren't called an actual affair. So the woman is kept silent, if it is the woman, or the other partner is kept silent because it's not so blatant.
They become friends, they become lovers, they just don't have intercourse.
Yeah.
And because they don't have intercourse, then they can feel more justification and more righteousness about the thing.
I had no idea this. What is
this is some of the mindfuckery that we're talking about.
Man, I'm sorry. I just didn't know. I just didn't get it. But that's a very specific thing, an emotional affair.
Oh, yeah.
I had no clue. Wow.
Yeah,
Another
and
one.
both of the husbands of these 2 women that he had emotional affairs were so adamant that it was an affair that they refused. They broke off communication with him, and one of the guys sent him a picture of a gun and threatened him. And so it was like, is this in my mind? Am I just being a super protective wife? Am I just a jealous wife? Or is there something valid to this? So I felt like my heart was broken, and I didn't want to have it broken for a 3rd time. And so I said, this marriage is over. I'll stay with you for until the older two kids are out of high school, because they only have 2 or 3 more years. But I could only last 6 more months with him, and I just couldn't take it any longer. Sure. So I moved out, and I was a single mom for 6 months, and then I moved in with my now present husband. So I wasn't really alone very much, but enough that I was able to separate mentally from the one marriage before I started the next.
So how has Ian helped you trust men or trust yourself, or is he good at like letting you have a voice and think for yourself? I mean, how are you? You feel validated by Ian, and how does he do that?
Yeah, so growing up in a family where my dad was very domineering and very much into the roles of women and men, I was used to that, and then marrying into a family the same way where, my dad never cooked a meal. My first husband never cooked a meal. So for 40 years, I just thought men don't know how to cook. So to join up with Ian and realizing, the first year I just sort of had my mouth open the whole time because he knows how to do laundry. He can cook a meal. He knows, how to take care of the kids. What's going on here? Wow. And he jokes because he said, I didn't have to do very much to impress you.
That's fine. I mean, I remember my mom saying, there's the washer, here's the clothes, go do it if you want your jeans.
That's a good mom.
Yeah, she was.
This sitcom about the girls that came up, they were kept in a dungeon as sex slaves or whatever.
The incredible Kimmy Schmidt or something like that.
And they come into the culture as like completely naive and stuff.
Fish out of water.
That's what I feel about Wendy's story here, is that she's emerging from a dungeon and a subculture that is so off the beaten path of reality that when she meets a man, that knows how to cook and do laundry, that when she saw the affairs, when she saw this or that tragedy happening, and yet felt powerless to do anything about it, then her voice, her agency, her ideas, her perspective is meaningless.
Yeah.
And she has to stuff, suppress what is otherwise real human feelings, like this sucks, this affair sucks, this hurts. And you're not even allowed to feel those things. And then you're
sure, there'd be resentment. Absolutely, there's resentment.
Yeah. You weren't allowed to be angry back then, and now when you go back and you revisit that memory, I think it's valid to let yourself get pissed.
Yeah.
It's not keeping record of wrongs, it's not digging up old stuff, it's not holding on to things that you should release. No, actually go back there and feel that. Allow yourself to feel that maybe for the first time.
Yeah. No, I think that's very helpful. And I think that's why when I came out as a atheist and I had so much anger that was all pent up, I didn't have a healthy outlet for it. I didn't have a lot of friends that I could, go to coffee and vent with them. So I vented on Facebook and I vented in emails to people. And, if I could go back and, soften the tone, I don't think I'd soften what I said, but I'd soften the tone of it.
Well, but hindsight's 20/20.
When you're in the middle, I didn't learn healthy ways of dealing with anger. We were just told not to be angry. Don't show your anger. You need to be kind. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Things like that. Sure. And so I didn't learn healthy ways of showing my feelings. And so I feel like I'm a teenager a lot of the times because I'll react the same way my teenagers do. Yeah. Because I didn't learn it very, it was stunted. Emotionally, I was stunted in that way.
One of the things that is such a catch-22 with this stuff, and we're very complex beings, is that when and if you do erupt, like we've reached a point where it's too hot to stay in the kitchen, that whole thing, it's like where the pain of being silent is now exceeding the pain of talking about it exceeds the pain of being silent. And so you talk about it, and here's the truth. There ain't nothing about that that's going to be perfect or pretty. It's just going to come out like vomit is not perfect or pretty. But
makes you feel better, though.
But it's got to come out. Your stomach is rejecting this. And so we can all stand in judgment with like, rating cards like a gymnastics judge, 10.1, 9.2, or whatever, and say, Wendy, the way you came out as an atheist, here's how we rank it. And you're ranking yourself. And we all need, like you said to me a second ago, we all need to cut ourselves some slack.
Yeah.
Because when this stuff erupts, it may or may not be very pretty, but the people around us that we can't control, if they don't have the maturity to, see through, oh, I understand why Wendy's exploding, and they actually take it personal and hold it against you and won't talk to you now, that's kind of on them, and you can't control that.
No, but I think it's very mature to do that. And this notion of arrested development, Edie and I were talking about that as well. I mean, if you start out at 17 or 16 or whenever you and Mindy started and whenever Wendy started, you behave the same way.
Yeah.
And
there's a stunted growth there.
It's a stunted thing.
And now at age 50, we're going back and maybe trying to catch up maturation-wise with what we didn't do. So
sure.
Back to Wendy's story.
Yeah.
You're out and proud. You're going on the show here with your real name. We're going to put your real picture up, and but there are some bridges burned. And how is your pursuit of new friendships and new community working out?
Well, before I answer that question, I want to go back before I forget.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's been helpful for Ian and I think, is that we find our own pursuits on the side, and so we have something to bring into the marriage, and that's been helping us keep the marriage strong, because our first two marriages failed, and we're really, really scared of a second marriage failing in some ways, so you work harder at it.
So give me an example of that with your outside interest coming in.
So like I said, we listen to a lot of podcasts. My husband is a computer programmer, so he's on the computer a lot. He has friends that he'll go out for coffee with. So we have things every day that we bring into the marriage, something that he teaches me. He listens to a podcast called The Bible Geek with Robert M. Price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know Robert Price.
And so he'll, tell me something that he learned on that podcast, because he doesn't always have the podcast. Like when he's making breakfast, he'll have the podcast playing so we can all hear it. So he'll tell me something, and he'll read something in Scientific American and tell me about that. And then I'll listen to something or read a blog and tell him something. So we try to bring things into the marriage to show that we are expanding our own autonomy. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's very freeing for me that I never had before.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas, everything had to be together with my husband, and I wasn't allowed to have autonomy. And so that's just one thing I might say that has been very helpful for Ian and I. And he respects me completely. He's definitely what you would say a male feminist, so he believes everybody is equal, and he treats everybody the same, and that's very refreshing too.
Sure.
So that gives me that autonomy. So I think autonomy for women is what is not taught in the church, and maybe is not realized by women that they need that. And we actually sleep in separate mattresses next to each other, I think it's been helpful for various reasons, to feel like we are our own persons, and then we can still be best friends for the rest of the time. So
Cool.
And when I hear things like you, Wendy, when you said I thought I was going to commit suicide, I mean, my God, that what pain you have to be in to even consider something like that. I've never been to that dark a place, and I get pretty dark, but I'd never go there.
Well, and it was in the context of, I went from having a meaning and a purpose as a missionary to where now if there's no God and there's none of this is any meaning, it's meaningless.
Yeah.
So where do you find, the joy and the purpose to get out of bed every day, Wendy?
I guess having my 3 kids and my 2 stepkids and my husband in my life, they're, blending a family has been incredibly difficult, but very rewarding also. So they're the reason I get up every morning. I've learned to respect my kids, whereas before in the church, you're told to love your kids and discipline them and be an example to them, but you're never ever told to respect them. And after coming out of the religion, I've learned to respect them as an equal, and that's been very healthy for us. I think we have a healthier relationship now than we would have ever if I'd stayed in the church.
Of course,
and
yes, absolutely.
And so, to see them launch into adulthood and go through the struggles that they go through and help them through that, to me, if I didn't have them, I don't know, but I mean, I got married young and had kids young. So part of it is that my identity as an adult is very much rooted in that also. So if I become an empty nester, I don't know if I'm going to go through another crisis.
Yeah, you will. You may.
Yeah, I hate to tell you, but you will.
Yeah, it's tough. Do your kids have any resentment? Do they feel?
No, there's still, like I say, issues, relationship issues with their father. They're incredibly happy that I've left the church because I took all the rules away and I became a much better mother, and I didn't judge them like I had in the past. And so they're very glad I did that. I regret taking them on the mission field because it was a really difficult life being a missionary kid where you have to uproot yourself and go overseas, and then you have to come back and be in front of churches and be a poster child, and your picture's on everybody's fridge, and that's not fun if you look at it from that perspective. But then they say, I'm so glad I got to learn Portuguese. I'm glad I got to interact with people from other cultures, and they love to travel. They do not know what racism is, which is fantastic because they learned to interact with people from all cultures. So those things are good, and so they're happy for that.
Are they bilingual?
Yeah.
They were pretty good at Portuguese. The two older ones, they were 10 and 12 when we moved back. And so the International Mission School had a Portuguese teacher, and about half the students were Portuguese by the end of it. But because it was a mission base that was run by an American mission, that 90% of the missionaries on it were American. So I wouldn't say they were bilingual. We had a functional level of Portuguese, in that we could go about regular life, but you wouldn't really be able to say I have a best friend who's who could speak Portuguese.
So there in Canada, you're living in the same region as your ex-husband and your in-laws, and maybe you're still in vicinity of a bunch of former Christian friends that you shared earlier, or at least in an email, that about 95% of your former friends won't talk to you, or at least are disappointed in your deconversion. How are you and Ian, rebuilding a community, a circle of friends?
Well, we've moved back and forth. I don't know if you know Canada very well, but the Great Lakes above Lake Erie, there's the big city in Canada is called Toronto, and then there's some other smaller cities nearby, and we live in one of the smaller ones. And then on the West Coast, so we always bounced back and forth because my family was on the West Coast and my first husband's family was here in Ontario, and my current husband's family is also in both those locations. So we've lived in both of those locations back and forth. So we have friends across the country, and I currently have lots of friends on Facebook. Whether I would be able to sit down with them and have a cup of coffee and actually have a decent conversation, I don't know. I tried to interact with a few of them recently after my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and people came out of the woodwork and, wanted to interact with me. And I thought, I used to say I lost my friends, but I think I've become estranged from them because realizing that my morals have changed, my identity has changed. I don't think we could ever go back to being what it was with a lot of those people. There are some Christians that we have both here in Ontario and also over in BC that accepted us before and after we left the faith, both of us individually, and those kind of Christians I want to keep in my life because they haven't judged me, and
of course.
But they also didn't grow up in a fundamentalist church. They're the more liberal Christians, I guess they're called. So
the best
those kind of people we try to keep in our life.
Absolutely.
And but it's really hard because I don't know how to make friends. When you're a Christian and you go to a church and then you go to a new town you can walk in the door of, say you're Baptist, you walk into the door of a Baptist church, automatically you have 100 friends. And then you go to another town and you can walk in that door and you have another 100 friends. And so growing up always in the church environment, I'm very, very naive in knowing how to start out a brand new friendship with somebody. And that's been eye-opening for me to realize that it's hard. It's really hard.
Well, you sort of dropped that little bomb about, is it Ian that has cancer?
Yeah, Ian found out in, between September and November, we had a sneaking suspicion about it. He was getting lots of tests, and then in November he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And he's had 2 months of chemo, and he's got 4 more months of chemo to go. And it's been quite a shock for our family, sure.
Is it able to be put in remission, you think? Or
well, he's 48, so he's young enough that his body should hopefully bounce back from it. The first round of chemo was hard to go through, but after about a week, all of his symptoms were starting to improve drastically. This last month, he had chemo last week, 2 days of it, and he still has a reaction. You know, he was vomiting, and he has a rash all over his body, and his face swelled up, and it's difficult to watch him go through that. But so I guess non-Hodgkin's lymphoma isn't actually curable, but it can be put into remission for 10 or 20 years with the right treatments. So
and managed, as it were.
Yeah. And managed, so he has hope.
You see, a lot of people would, maybe not as strong as you, but a lot of people would go running back to God, I would think. You know.
Well, it's been interesting because it's because growing up in the church and growing up in an evangelical church, we were taught to talk to God all the time. You know, talking to Jesus all the time. I had friends who would talk out loud, you know, in their house, or we would go on a walk and they would just, you know, talk to Jesus, and just a constant relationship kind of
that's me.
idea. So I was very much part of that, and it still is, it's in my nature, I guess, to right away want to pray, you know, or thank God, thank you, Jesus, for such and such. And so not being able to have that I guess the crutch to fall back on or whatever has been hard. It really has been hard. And there are days I wish there was a God. I wish I could believe that again. I wish I could go back and forget all that I know now, and because it is a sense of comfort, and I totally understand that now more than I did before he had cancer.
Right.
But it doesn't make me go back to the church, because once you know something, you can't unlearn it. And once I know that there isn't such a thing as a God, and it's all a myth, and I can't unknow that now.
But there is such thing as doctors and science and good medication, and those are the things that are going to really help. I'm
so glad, that science exists, because my husband is, still alive. I don't know what would happen if, people did die of that. And actually a year ago, we had another scare. He had a grand mal seizure and almost died in my arms, and then broke his back from that. And so he was in the hospital for a week and a half and was in a back brace for months and couldn't drive for 8 months. And then he gets cancer, a year later, and all of that kind of thing. Yes, it could have taken me, back to being a Christian and that. But I've found that we actually have a lot more comfort in ourselves than we realize. And instead of, thinking, we always need God, we always need something to fall back on, and realize, wow, we got through that and we didn't need God. Yeah. And, we can do this. We're actually stronger than we think we are, and we depend on each other, and the family gets closer together, and we rely on each other, and builds trust and love. And
no, that's beautiful.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Well, and it's an example of how the God figure, when and if you defer your energies and your thoughts and your feelings toward him, then you're taking it away from yourselves. I mean, like you guys could be interacting, looking towards each other,
growing stronger.
But when everybody's just calling the lifeline, to God, it's imaginary, And it's a fix. It's an opiate. It makes you feel better. But when you stay, you stick your face in the present moment and you say yes to it, and you're engaging with reality as opposed to checking out into La La Land. And so, I think it's beautiful that Wendy noticed, hey, we did this. We got through this. And we're stronger, and we love each other, and we held each other, and we didn't need our security blanket or our pacifier or our cocaine, or our religion. We did it, and we're the better for it. And I don't know. I just think that I love anytime we can point out that life is better when you get honest with it. Then there's some payoff to being a big boy.
Well, and after leaving the religion, I started realizing I'm not afraid of death anymore. And when you're in the faith, you tell yourself, I don't fear death. I'm going to go to heaven, and I've said the prayer, and I'm doing all the right things. And I guess the Catholics, they go to confession, but as an evangelical, you confess all day long, and you're constantly aware of guilt and shame, and you don't quite know. You hope that you'll be taken up. And I was in that movement in the late 1970s, early 80s, where they were showing that film. It's sort of like the Left Behind film, but I don't know what it was called. But it was really scary because it showed that some people didn't go to heaven because they hadn't confessed, and they were doing sin, sinning right up to the time when Jesus comes back. And there's still days. And recently this happened, everyone was out of the house and I didn't know why. And my first reaction was, shit, I've lost the chance to go to heaven. I missed it.
That's right.
So it still comes back. But overall, having Ian go through these health crises has helped me understand or realize I'm not afraid of death like I would be in the past, where you desperately pray that your loved one will be healed, and you can't, which doesn't make sense. If heaven is wonderful, then you wouldn't really care if they go to heaven, because that's they're out of their pain or something. But somehow you still do desperately pray for them to be healed. But without that to fall back on, my sense of death has changed, and thinking that Ian could die when we had to, we thought the worst. Sometimes, because we didn't know quite what his cancer was and if it was cancer. And, I had to deal with that without God. I had to deal with that without a Bible, without a pastor comforting me. I had to deal with that all on my own and think that through and process that and get to the other side of it. And it was dark days, but we got through it. And if he doesn't, make it, if I don't make it, I had a mini stroke in 2013 and had a bit of a scare, and it sort of helped me realize I'm not going to necessarily live forever, and I've got a congenital heart issue that could flare up again. And I think, but it doesn't matter anymore. There's something about not having to worry about heaven and hell that, okay, well, I've had these 47 years on earth. If I'm meant to die, I'm going to become part of the earth and, be compost, and that's okay. And somebody else will take my place as a mentor in my kids' lives. And, that's how life is. So it's been very freeing for me to see myself in the bigger picture of the cosmos instead of my little world, that if I die, it better be for a purpose. And if I haven't completed my mission, then, my life was a waste. And if I haven't prayed enough, then I'm going to eternal damnation. All those crazy, crazy concepts that when you're outside of it, they're all gone. So, it's, Cass, I wanted to mention that your intro to the podcast that you did with Amber Cantorna, I actually copied and pasted it into my Facebook feed. Because it was really, really amazing how you describe that whole idea of hell. And you said the concept of eternal life diminishes a person's ability to be present and concerned with reality. And I thought, that's very real when you have somebody who has cancer. To realize this is life right now. I'm going to be mindful of the present moment. What are we going to do today, instead of like let's pray, let's pray, let's pray.
Or telling
Let's hope
yourself,
for this.
this is all going to be fine. God's promised. I'm
Right.
standing on God's promises, and this is going to
Yeah.
be fine. When in fact it may not be fine.
It may not.
Right, yeah.
Then he works in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, well, that just covers everything. That's the
Pretty
irony.
much.
Yeah.
If Ian is healed, then God healed him. If Ian is not healed, then God works in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
And
He's got a plan and all that.
yeah, he's got a plan. And so, like, he always gets off the hook.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, Wendy, if we're coming into the home stretch here, I thank you for sharing your story. If we get into some lighter questions, what do you guys do for fun, or what are some of your hobbies?
Well, growing up in a homesteading family, I didn't actually learn to read until I was 7.5. My parents did not emphasize academics. They wanted me to be a good mother and a good wife someday. So I learned how to do, all of the good things like baking and cooking and sewing, and I sewed all my own clothes and just all that kind of thing. So hobbies, I never have a problem figuring out what to do with my spare time. I tend to be a workaholic and not know how to not do things. So, but I don't know. Our family, having a blended family, has been very challenging. To bring two families together that my husband and I have different parenting styles, and to bring them together while they're not young and they've already been established with those parenting styles. So what movies we watch, where we go for restaurants, and where we travel, all those kinds of things has a lot of discussion because it's not by default. We all have to agree on things. So for me, my tastes are constantly changing as I'm deconverting still, and like I listen to a lot of stand-up comedy in order to help myself go to sleep because I have insomnia issues. So,
Well, who do you watch?
You name the comedian, and I probably listen to them.
Amy Schumer.
Oh, yeah. But 2 years ago, I couldn't handle Bill Burr because he was too off, too wild.
Yeah.
And then now I can handle him. So I'm getting myself desensitized to swearing, to things about sex, to violence, all those kinds of things.
That's right. Yeah, I forget that's part of the process. Yeah.
Our family likes to watch Netflix, so we've watched the TV shows Frankie and Grace and The Mentalist and Blue Blood and Suits and Downton Abbey, all those kinds of things.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great
so,
shows.
and we've got quite a few nice parks and walking trails near where we live here. I used to be more into bicycling with my kids, and my dad was really into sailing. We always had a sailboat, homemade sailboat. So,
Cool.
Yeah, there's lots of things to do in our free time.
Excellent.
So what about, is there something about yourself that is really unique that, that maybe most people, even in your own life, may not know about you?
Well, I can get really personal if you want me to.
Well, it's up to you. It's your...
Okay, well, some people would already know this, but not very many. I've never gotten drunk. I've never gotten high on pot. I didn't smoke a cigarette till after I was 40. And I had never masturbated till after I was 40. So I don't know if people
congratulations.
want to hear that.
No, yeah, absolutely. We want to hear that.
Welcome to the human race. There you go.
Exactly.
No, I'm serious. That's.
Yeah.
I appreciate you. Saying that, because there's so many listeners on this show that still feel sexual baggage from religion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the more we get free, like you said, you're getting more and more free about language and more in sexuality. Mm-hmm. And just the fucking truth about being human, and that we masturbate, I thought that I was pretty sexually healed, and I'd been out for a long time, and I went to a lecture with Darrell Ray.
Darrell Ray, yes, I love that guy.
All right. Okay, so have you read his books?
No, but I've listened to his Secular Sexuality podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's
so
really
he
good.
came and did a lecture at Vanderbilt, and he literally asked the whole crowd, he said, how many of you masturbate? Raise your hand. And, obviously I masturbate a lot. And so
two
I was
hands went up for you.
But I was shocked, and it was strange because I was I looked around at all these other adults, and professionals and everything, and everybody raised their hand.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
So
it's like,
anyway, good for you, Wendy. And what about, do you have any pets?
Yeah, we've got 3 cats.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you're a cat person.
Yeah, we've got
Crazy
cats.
cat
Well,
lady.
my daughter would love for us to have a dog, but because we've moved 4 times in 6 years, it's really hard to. It's a lot easier to move the cats than with the dog.
Okay.
True.
So on this particular episode, you gave me some music to use. Tell me a little bit about that music and where it comes from.
Yeah, my daughter, she has a natural gift for music. I remember recording her singing Jesus Loves Me back when she was like 2 years old. And she's taught herself how to play the piano. And then she's found some computer software where she's taught herself how to create her own unique music. So, yeah, if you want to use it, that would be great.
Of course.
Yeah, we are using it, and I'll say it in real time because people have already heard it when they heard the intro. But how old is she?
She's 17.
Okay.
She has played the piano recently. She played like at an old age home, volunteering there.
That's
she doesn't
beautiful.
have. It's interesting because not being in the church, I grew up. My mom was very into music. She was the church organist, and I always sang in the choirs, and we sang in the, on the worship team. Before we were married, after we were married, on the mission field. Like I never was not involved in music. I played the violin. So it's interesting not being at the church because there's so few opportunities to present your music or to perform music.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, my daughter not being in the church doesn't have very many opportunities. So we have to sort of find those for her. So,
No, but that's great that she goes to old folks' homes and plays for.
Yeah.
That's
wonderful.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah,
I'm sure they appreciate it.
that's right.
Oh yeah. They don't mind if she makes any mistakes. Although the one place that she went to, the piano was so out of tune, it wasn't very fun for her.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Hey, this is from left field. There's a wonderful pastor in Canada by the name of Greta Vosper. Have you ever heard of Greta?
Yeah, I've actually emailed with her a couple times because she started the Oasis movement up here or wanted to start an Oasis church in Toronto.
Yeah, she has.
You have.
And so we were thinking of seeing if we could have it down here in Hamilton where I live. But I think I'm a little bit more into the non-churchy kind of group. Hers is still fairly church-like in that, she rewrites the hymns and that kind of a thing. So
there's music and
yeah, I'm a bit more into a club.
Yeah, this is an issue for people that are post-Christian. It's like how they want to. I mean, we're pack animals. We need community, and we benefit from community, and life really happens and is enhanced by community. But we've got so much baggage around our experiences and our previous experiences with bad communities that it's hard to navigate what this is going to look like and where I'm comfortable.
Yeah, I get
But
that.
I still encourage you, obviously, to find a way to be in community that makes you comfortable and yet you're not, isolated and all alone and things like that.
Yeah, we've joined the humanist group here in the area, and they meet once a month. And we did go to the non-con during the summer, and they had some really good speakers there. But it is awkward to get together with everybody because I still feel like I'm extracting my belief system. And a lot of them are, have been humanists for 20 years, and so they don't quite know where I'm coming from. And
no, that's a big difference.
so that's why I thought if we could start an Oasis type of group, but have it different where when I was actually in a smaller town in the same province here, I helped start a Mothers of Preschool group, and it's an offshoot of a group down in the States. And the format of it could be adapted for adults. But the point is that you have twice a month meetings and you have childcare for anyone who has families, and you have different speakers. And it's just like a club in that way where you come together. And the point of that one was you had something in common in that you all had preschoolers. Mm-hmm. But if you had the function of it, to say, we all have something in common in that we've left the church, and that we miss that, but we don't want to have to do the singing and the worship leading and somebody speaking for half an hour. But we could watch Neil deGrasse Tyson's Cosmos shows, or you could have, I don't know.
Or just talk to one another.
Yeah.
Yeah, or just have, a talking time. So my life's really busy with my family right now, but I'd be very interested in starting something like that in the future. So I don't know. I think it's needed. I know I would go every week if I could.
Yeah,
but
sure.
We tried to go to the Unitarian Church. I just felt like it was too much like a regular church, and there was it was a trigger for me. I cried every time I went because I just couldn't get away from feeling like I'm going back to a church again.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, Wendy,
What a story.
great stuff.
Well, I've really enjoyed talking to you guys, and keep up the good work. I love the fact that you have a big variety of people that you interview. Anytime you can interview other women, that to me is very helpful. That's one reason I wanted to start a podcast a year ago, because I just felt like there was a lack of women's voices out there.
Yeah.
But it's hard because a lot of times the women, well, I don't want to pigeonhole everybody, but a lot of times the women are the ones taking care of the kids. And after the kids are grown, I don't know, maybe it's the 50-year-olds that need to start the podcasts.
Maybe.
Well,
But,
and one theme that we're talking about here, Wendy, with women that have been in the patriarchal church is gaining the agency and the confidence and the power to speak out and to have a voice. And so I think the fact that I do work hard to try to get more and more women on the show, and it's not 50-50. I mean, as hard as I try, I can't keep 50-50.
Yeah.
And so there is something about ex-Christian women that is built into this systemic suppression that it's probably, it makes sense that women are a little bit more reluctant to come forward.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, a year ago when I was thinking about this, I reached out to, I think it's called the Godless Bitches. They are two women who have a podcast. I reached out to them, and I also reached out to Ryan Bell, and both of them wrote back and said, they'd support me if I started a podcast. But then our family had to move again, and life got complicated, so I put it on the back burner. But I really did feel like there's a definite need for that, and maybe if somebody listens to this podcast, say I want to co-host with her, because I think that there might be women who would be willing to speak up if all of the hosts were women. I don't want to put you guys down, but there's something about women who've come out, if they've come out of a background like myself, they're still afraid of men in some ways, and maybe afraid to be interviewed by a man, where they might not feel that fear if it was all women.
Or listen to
board.
our podcast. I mean, they're not
So
even going to listen to us because we're men.
Yeah, could
Yeah.
be.
So I really see a need for that. I don't know if I'm the one who's meant to fill that need, but
Go for it.
yeah,
That's what
it
I
would
say.
be really helpful for. I know I wished I had had that. Like, you guys were one of the first non-Christian podcasts, and then I went from there to The Thinking Atheist, Point of Inquiry, Atheist on Air, Friendly Atheist, Life After God, and all of them have male hosts. So there really wasn't anything for me 2 years ago, and I wish there was. So, yeah.
Well, listen, let me say this. I don't know, and if you get it, I mean, if there's any way I can help launch that, I would set aside a week to where Bob and I are not even on the air. It's you. I would give you a week of my space.
Oh, wow. That means a lot to me, Cass.
Sure.
Well, what I did was I was trying to launch my own self-employed business where I'm a subcontractor doing computer work for someone. So I was trying to expand my own skills, learning about websites and podcasting and passive income, that kind of thing. So I learned all about how to do podcasts. I recorded about 6 of them.
Oh.
And then, we moved. So I had to put it on the back burner. But
well,
so
listen, Wendy,
it's within grasp.
If any of those 6 podcasts you like the best or something, or if you want to record a new one, you send me the WAV file, and I will make it. I'll make it one of our weekly episodes.
Well, the theme of them wasn't like, that's the thing. I'd backed off from feeling like I had a voice, and so they were very neutral themed. So I would want to have the theme more related to agnostic and atheist. I
would too,
have,
because that's our format. But yeah,
I have blog posts that I've pre-written related to that, so I could resurrect those, I guess. But no, I'm very interested in that, and I have a few people actually I had talked about a year ago who would be willing to be interviewed on them too. So
Super.
we might get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I get the impression, Wendy, very strongly that this is not the last time you and I are going to talk. So
Yeah, no, this is a good start to a
I'm
friendship.
really looking forward to getting to know you better and getting to learn from you and this experience that we're both in and that a lot of people are in. There is, there's just, it seems like there's layers and layers and layers to this recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And your show, today's episode, and your story reveals, and my wife's story reveals that this is not just, I'm an ex-Christian and now life's good. No, we've still got some shit to work out, and it's hard, personal, internal, emotional, mental work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's laborious.
Absolutely.
Well, maybe Mindy can be one of the first interviews.
You know what? She's refused to come on my show, but she might come on yours,
I come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks,
All right,
thanks, Wendy.
Okay, thanks so much, Cass and Bob. Have a good day.
Good
You
talking
too.
to you. Bye-bye. My gosh. Well,
I'm a little awestruck a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Talk about a well-balanced woman now.
Well, on her way.
Yeah.
She's got some work to do, but the work that she's done to get to this point right here.
Amazing.
And I think she's been with her new husband. They've been married 3 years, but they've been together 6.
Right, right.
So we're looking at a time frame there where, she's done a lot of work to regain her identity and her agency.
Sure.
After 40 years of suppression.
That's just amazing to me.
And this is probably as far as me personally listening and talking to a person. I mean, we hear about this kind of stuff, but I've never personally talked to a person that was so oppressed as a woman and so fearful, or at least alienated and estranged, or kind of separated from men.
Yeah.
There's 3 men in her life that she's basically known. I mean,
And all of them pretty shitty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is her sampling of men.
So no wonder.
No wonder.
Right. You would say they're all like that. They're all, nasty fucks or whatever.
And so here comes Ian, who's helping her, not just, who gives a fuck about what man's reputation is, but at least, he's developing a human reputation with equals here, totally changing her world and her paradigm. And then he gets diagnosed with this disease, and life gets complicated really quickly. And, I just watched Manchester by the Sea yesterday, 2.5 hours of torture. And I don't mean that in a bad movie sense, but it's lives full of pain.
Yeah.
And I feel like that I just got off the phone with Wendy in another episode of Manchester by the Sea as far as the hardship.
Right.
Guys, this life is so hard. Maybe I'm just feeling that more than usual.
Sure.
Especially as a white privileged male, straight, with all the privileges I have in America. But this is, her story is hard. And I hope, I don't even have to hope. I can guarantee you, out of the thousands of listeners that we have, there's at least a dozen women that are probably in tears right now as a result, or at least somewhere in the last hour and a half. Wendy said something that they were like, oh my God, I never knew.
That's me. Right.
That's me. And that there was someone else who's been through this. This is the encouragement we hope to
and we want to hear from those women too.
Well, yeah,
We'd
we'll
love
have
to
you on the
them
show.
Absolutely. And I learned a lot, the stuff about this notion of an emotional relationship.
An emotional affair.
An emotional affair. I've never heard of anything like that.
That's kind of a secular thing. I'm surprised you haven't heard that.
I haven't heard that.
It just means that you were, like at work, you were courting and flirting and wooing a woman or, a partner at work or in a setting to where it wasn't physical, but it was beyond appropriate when you're a monogamous person, which nobody is, but that's a whole other story.
Oh, okay. But still, I hadn't heard of that. I mean, the way she expressed it, that was kind of unique for me.
Yeah.
And the sinner's prayer was a new one on me too.
Yeah,
So I don't know why I didn't know that, but I didn't.
Yeah, that's a very
so there's always something
evangelistic
new.
thing. Yeah.
For those who are me, I don't know how many of them are you, but probably not many.
They're probably not listening to this show.
Yeah. For those who, you always pick up a little jewel every now and again, and I got a couple this show.
Yeah.
So it was a good one.
But
We'll have her back.
Our thanks. Yeah, honestly, I mean, whether I feature her show as one of our
I think
weekly
it's a great idea,
episodes, or we have her on again, and I don't know that I could take another episode of that though. I mean, that's hard, and I do plan to talk to her offline.
Yeah, well, I know that.
I want to pick her brain about how to better serve, and not just serve, but be in relationship with my wife after years of patriarchy.
Yeah. So she knows a lot about missionary work. She can help you.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob.
All right, Cass. Thank you, man. We'll see you next week.